Greetings from Project Hindsight to fellow astrologers at the St. Petersburg Astrological Conference. My name is Robert Schmidt, and I would like to give you a glimpse of some of the riches we have uncovered through the translation and study of Hellenistic astrological texts. But first of all, let me define what I mean by Hellenistic astrology. By this term, I mean the kind of astrology that appeared sometime after the Alexandrian conquest of Egypt in 332 BCE and sometime before the beginning of the Christian era. It is a bit difficult to pinpoint more exactly the precise time in which this material made its appearance. But it is current scholarly opinion that the writings that constitute the original Hellenistic astrological material were composed somewhere in the 2nd century before the Christian era. The authorship of those original writings is also quite mysterious. Their works are associated with a cast of semi-divine figures with names like Hermes Trismegistus, Asclepius, Anubis, Orpheus, and so forth. Now, in point of fact, we do not have very much material from those early astrologers, whom we will call the founding astrologers of Hellenistic tradition. Sometime shortly after the 2nd century BCE, there was a very large compilation of astrological material made by some equally mysterious persons, namely a man named Nechepso and another named Petasiris. I say that this is somewhat mysterious because Nechepso was in point of fact an Egyptian pharaoh, and Petasiris was a high priest, but they evidently lived at different eras. So these may have been fictional names for the actual authors of this apparently very large treatise. Nechepso and Petasiris were understood to be the explicators and expositors of the original material going back to Hermes Trismegistus and the other folks that I mentioned. However, this large compendium of astrological material itself did not survive intact. We do not have all of the volumes and all of the different books that were written by these two figures. What we know of their writing is primarily due to excerpts made by later authors and occasional paraphrases and just simple references that in many cases do not have a lot of content. In any case, this material that was formulated in this lost work by Nechepso Petasiris became the source of all the later Hellenistic astrological writings. The Hellenistic tradition could be understood to extend from this founding period, which I've mentioned, all the way up till perhaps the 7th century of the Christian era. Now, even though this covers the Roman period and part of the early Byzantine period, I still call it Hellenistic astrology for the simple reason that it has all of the earmarks of this original astrology and was not influenced by other traditions. This is to some extent like calling the work of William Lilly and the English school, who were writing during the end of the 1600s, medieval astrology, because the type of astrology that they are practicing is in fact medieval, a direct has a direct link to the medieval tradition and was not influenced by many of the revisionist tendencies that you will find in such writers as Kepler and the French astrologer Morin. So Hellenistic astrology, by this term, I mean the kind of astrology that was practiced in something like its pure and unadulterated form from approximately the 2nd century before the Christian era all the way up until about the 7th century. The Hellenistic astrology marks an entirely new beginning in the history of astrology. It's almost certainly the case that the Hellenistic astrologers got the idea for doing astrology from the Babylonians, or possibly from the pre-Hellenistic Egyptians, or perhaps from both of whom were practicing astrology in some form or other prior to the Hellenistic period. But during this Hellenistic era, a vast number of new concepts and techniques were introduced that cannot be traced back to either the Babylonian or pre-Hellenistic Egyptian antecedents. These contain such basic astrological concepts as houses, sign characteristics such as quadruplicities and triplicities, and masculine and feminine signs, aspect doctrine, timing procedures such as transits, secondary progressions, and also directive procedures, and also the study of solar returns, plus quite a few other basic matters that are still part of astrological practice, although the original concepts may be understood differently in modern times. So this material, which is sort of recognizably astrology in the modern sense, was all introduced during this Hellenistic period. This is why we could with some justice say that Hellenistic astrology is the origin of all later Western astrology. This Hellenistic tradition had an enormous influence on the development of the Western astrological tradition. The material, much Hellenistic material was translated into Arabic in the 8th century, either directly from Greek sources or through Persian intermediate translations. And for at least the first few centuries of the Arabian flowering of astrological practice, astrology was still, for all intents and purposes, Hellenistic astrology. I must say, however, that the Arabian astrologers evidently did not get all of the Hellenistic astrology that we possess today. The primary sources that they relied upon when they were formalizing, and schematizing their own astrology, the primary authors, Hellenistic authors, were Dorotheus of Sidon and Ptolemy. The problem with this is that Ptolemy is not exactly a representative Hellenistic astrologer. Although there is a lot of material in the Tetrabiblos, which is in fact traditional Hellenistic astrology, Ptolemy